Thank you everyone for joining us and welcome to our broadcast today, Insights in 3D, using normative data to expand the value and visibility of your employee survey program. We will review strategies to utilize normative data to increase the informational value of your employee survey program, and we will also be discussing other employee engagement measures by placing them in the context of the global employee experience. With me today, I have an outstanding speaker who's going to share her expertise and perspectives around this particular topic. Pat Sikora is a TNS consultant whose industry experience ranges from healthcare, technology, and telecommunication to education, government, and electric utility, to name a few areas. Pat received her PhD in social psychology from the University of Colorado Boulder and was a consultant on a 10-year National Institute of Health research grant investigating the impact of organizational change on employee well-being. Her specialty areas include research design, qualitative and survey methods, content analysis, organizational identity, and work stress and employee health. In addition to providing an overview as to how employee engagement measurements can actively support and energize organizational growth, Pat will be sharing some specific ways to broaden the visibility and value of our audience's engagement measurement efforts. To give you a little background about TNS, it is the world's largest provider of human behavior research, working with millions of employees each year to help them analyze a variety of issues, including the ones we are discussing today. TNS focuses its efforts on measuring and inspiring higher performance globally within the client population that it surveys and supports annually. We are very proud to support many leading organizations around the globe. At this point, I want to go ahead and turn it over to our presenter, Pat, who is going to start off the program by giving you her perspective on why normative data is useful for employee engagement efforts.
Thank you so much, Jody and Scott. Thank you for setting this up and giving me the opportunity to spend time with everyone today. Again, we're going to spend some time together today talking about norms and normative data. We're going to go through a lot of slides that may seem very busy with data, but the focus I want to keep us on today is the questions that normative data can answer. Why is it important? Why is it useful to you and your company? And then we'll go through a lot of examples of applications, but the main thing I want to focus on today with you is how you can use it, what questions you can address in your organization using this kind of data. So norms or normative data provide the context for your organization's employee engagement data. The reasonable question is, so what? Who cares? Is it just more data? We're already swimming in data. We don't need more data. We're swamped. We can't process the data we already have. You're going to give me more data. What good does this do me? Well, a quote from a very famous and influential artist provides some insight into that. Kenneth Nolan was a very influential artist in the 60s and 70s and started the entire, what it was called the Washington Color Movement. And his work reflected the idea that the image was only meaningful if you considered the whole canvas and even the edges of the canvas. So for him, his work painting what was on the canvas was only meaningful if you took the entire thing into consideration. And I'd like to suggest that our data is the same way. Our data is only helpful, is only interesting, is only meaningful if we take into account the entire canvas, the entire environment in which it's placed. So again, so what? Normative data, I believe, provides meaning. I think data in isolation tends to be more empty numbers or nonsense. For example, you might get a 79 or 65 in your employee scores. What does that really mean? You've got a 4% increase. What does that really mean? 6-point increase, 85% in some finding. Without some contextual environment within which to place those data, it's hard to really understand what that means. You may have a lot of good internal data, and you may be focusing on your trends from the past, which is very good, but you're still within your boundaries. You're within your corporate walls, and that's a very limited context in which to talk about your data. So normative data, in many respects, broadens the purpose of your engagement measurement efforts. When we really think about what we're doing and why, what's the point? Why are we collecting this data? The real point here is to acquire, retain, and grow top talent. We may be doing really, really well internally. We may be seeing growth in key measures over time, but we may still be struggling to acquire and retain top talent. And because talent comes from and goes to out there. If you don't know what's going on out there, how can you compete effectively for the best people? So when we have this revolving door sometimes in organizations, despite the best numbers, we've got increasing satisfaction scores, we've got increasing engagement scores, but we still have this revolving door. Normative data helps us understand what's on the other side of that door. It helps us put our information in context so we can better understand why people are coming or going to our organization. It also focuses your organizational goals on what really matters by emphasizing the environment. Now, internal data can focus you very quickly on too much of what's going on inside. It will limit your ability to adapt and take advantage of growth opportunities. There's an interesting topic in the marketing arena that came out several years ago called marketing myopia. It was a gentleman named Theodore Levitt, seminal paper in the 60s in the marketing world, and he was talking about how short-sighted or narrow understandings of what businesses are in led to complacency or loss of vision of what was really going on in the marketplace. The classic example that he used was the buggy whip, the idea that buggy whip manufacturers could create the best buggy whips in the entire world, but what if the world is moving on? What if cars come on? The buggy whip manufacturers lost sight of what was going on around them, so despite being the best at the buggy whips, they lost traction in the marketplace. And I think the same thing can be true of our human resource employee engagement world. We can become so focused on what's going on internally that we are essentially focusing on 8-track tapes when the world is now in CDs and digital media. So to focus externally helps you to focus on what's going on around you, where the opportunities are emerging, and equally important, where the threats are. Has the nature of the employee desires, what's driving them, what they want, changed to a degree that you are simply not matching what they want? I also think that normative data expands the conversation. You're going to be asking questions that are more broad, that are more strategic, that involve things that matter to more parts of the organization. You're going to be asking questions about how do we compare with the industry? What's our market position? How is our organization tracking with larger trends? Why are we losing our best people year after year? What's going on the other side of that revolving door? And how do we get the best people year after year? What's on the other side of that door that can bring them in? So these kinds of questions, they really raise the value and visibility to the C-suite because these are questions that fundamentally are linked to your organization's growth and profitability. They're more than HR questions. They're more than simple operations questions. They are large-scale strategic questions that can raise the importance and value of employee engagement data to different parts of the organization as well as the C-suite. It creates linkages that may not currently be there. So again, there's questions that matter. Who is better than us at retaining top talent and why? What matters the most to young prospective employees? How are other organizations building engagement in depressed economies? What matters in the new markets where we want to compete? What industries are creating effective brand ambassadors and how are they doing that? Is paying more really the best option for retaining talent in all of our markets? And are investments in employee engagement really paying off, or are we really just kidding ourselves? These are questions that are high-level strategic questions that may be bouncing around your organization, and normative data can put your data in this larger context to answer these larger questions. So in effect, normative data puts your own data in 3D. And I'm going to use this model throughout most of our presentation, the rest of the presentation, as a framework to talk about the myriad of questions that we could have. The list of questions could be endless. How do we organize these questions in a way that help us use the data in a way that's more coherent and more practical? So, for example, normative data can answer questions about time. It answers questions about improvement. Where have we been? Where are we going? Where is the world going? Where are certain types of employees coming and going in terms of key metrics? We can benchmark within a certain period of time against other industries or countries. That answers questions about your relative performance. And again, I keep bringing in this marketing idea of competitive threat. Where is your competition going? You are in competition with other organizations for the best talent in the world. What are they doing that is making it difficult for you to attract, or what are they doing that's making it easy for you to attract and retain the best talent in those industries or in those marketplaces? And then finally, normative data can ask deeper questions. It can help us understand the data better. Your data in isolation may be hard to understand in terms of what's really going on, what's really important, how are we different, what really matters to employees. And we can use normative data to ask some of these deeper questions and help add value to the understanding of our existing data. Okay, before I dive into more applications and the questions that might be relevant, I'd like to spend just a little bit of time talking about the data that we're going to be using in a lot of these examples. We've got two types of data at TNS Employee Insights that can offer a 3D view on your data. First, we have what's called the normative data. We call it the normative database, is often how we talk about it. It's based on client results. That's our existing clients. Then we have a global panel data source that's based on a general employee sample. I'm going to spend just a bit of time going through both of those so you have a sense of the data before we dive into all the examples. So first of all, the normative data, the normative database. That is data that's pooled from our existing clients into a large database. We take the findings, the results from all our clients, and pool those together in a large data set. The current data set includes 126 items, hundreds of companies, millions of employees, and over 137 countries. The data is broken out in a myriad of ways. We can slice and dice it beyond belief. And the norms are aggregated by company. What this does is it essentially gives one vote to each company. It's a way of weighing the data so the huge companies don't overwhelm the data. For example, we may have a company, we have several clients that have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of employees. We don't want the experience of those hundreds of thousands of employees to overwhelm the data set when we've got 20,000 employees or 10,000 employees in other companies. So it's a way of equalizing the voices from all the companies that we support. The other data set is what we call the global panel data. This is a study we ran in December of 2011 that utilized the survey panel from a colleague of ours in the TNS family. Using that data, we surveyed about 17,000 employees from over 21 countries. Those employees represented many companies in a range of industries, and the data, importantly, is representative of the working population in that country. So of the 21 countries we surveyed, we have about 800 in each country, and that 800 is representative of that country's working population. All participants in the studies were currently employed, or in the study were currently employed, and they'd also been employed at least by one other company. And this is interesting and important because we also asked employees to rate their former company, what we call the exit questions. So all the study participants answered questions about their current company as well as questions about the company they recently left. And these were voluntary exits. So these are people that voluntarily left a job. So we have both current data and what we call the exit panel. We did a similar study in 2007, so this allows us to to compare data across 2 time periods. So again, just a general view of what that data looks like. We've got participation from most of the continents where there's online sampling available. And again, we have a balanced sample across all those countries. Okay, let's get back into the questions. So let's talk about our data in 3D, and let's just focus on this time dimension for a little bit. How can we use the normative data to ask questions about trends and emerging opportunities? So again, we're going to go through a lot of slides that have a lot of data, and I'll try to highlight the things that are really critical here, but perhaps your company is showing consistent improvement over time. We're just seeing several of our clients that have been with us for a while are seeing this nice uptick in overall satisfaction, in recommendation, in turnover intentions year after year, and they're really pleased, and they should be pleased and proud about that. But are our results over and above what's going on in the larger marketplace? Is it really good? Is it great? Is it just riding the wave of what is happening out in the marketplace? So this is a chart that shows, this is our normative database, and it shows over the period of time from 2008 through 2012 trends in things like satisfaction with a job, which is the red line, satisfaction with a company at present, which is the gold line, and recommending their company as a place to work, which is the purple line. And as you can see, there's a little bit of a dip in 2009, 2010, which may correspond with the recession and other economic activity and layoffs, but it seems to be tracking back up again. So overall, we look at this data and we say, you know what, it looks like things are tracking back up. And the question is, are you in your company following the trend? Are you ahead of the trend? When we look at the gap between, for example, 2010 and 2012 in satisfaction with a company, that's about a 5-point gap. Did your company make a 5-point jump in that metric in that same time period? Was it larger, smaller? Are you flat? Where are you going with that, your data over time? So again, the normative database provides you a context within which to look at your growth and your trends. Another thing that some organizations are interested in looking at is being ahead of the curve. What's going on out there that we want to know about that we can get ahead of? And in the employee engagement world, one of the things we might be wanting to pay attention to are things that might be declining even within this context of overall satisfaction. Remember the previous slide we showed that satisfaction and recommendation were starting to tick up a little bit in 2011 and 2012, but we see some of these other measures dropping in that same time period and not rebounding as much as we might expect them to. Questions like, are you satisfied with the recognition you get for a good job? The organization does a good job of retaining talent. That top talent, that's that gold line. That's showing a very strong drop, and it's not really coming back up. I have the opportunity for personal development. I'm satisfied with my opportunities to get a better job. What we're seeing is that despite this rebound of general engagement, these drops in recognition, reward, opportunities for new jobs, could those be linked with this drop in the ability to retain top talent? If you want to get ahead of the curve, are you doing what needs to be done to recognize performance, to provide opportunities for development so that as satisfaction bumps up, you're also seeing a retention of the people that you want to stay as much as possible? So again, the normative data here shows trends that might be worth looking at and considering in terms of your action planning so you can get ahead of the curve rather than simply reacting to a problem 2 years from now. Another way of getting ahead of the curve is even a bigger perspective of competitive advantage, of revenue, of profit, of marketing. In this case, we might want to look at emerging issues that point to ways that you can be more competitive in the marketplace. This graph shows the difference between our panel data, our global panel data, the 2007 and 2011 data. The red bar is 2007, and the gold bar is 2011. And what we see here is that we have several questions that dropped quite a bit over the last 5 years, 4 or 5 years. Senior management demonstrates that quality is a top priority. That dropped 9 points in the last 5 years. Day-to-day activities in my work group shows that quality is a top priority. That's also declined. I received training to do a quality job. That's down. My organization is making changes to compete. That's down. And my supervisor supports exceptional customer service. That's down. What does that mean in terms of how employees in the companies are responding to and thinking about their customers? How is quality declines in the organization, perceptions of quality as a focus, impacting how we serve customers and impacting how we make money? So again, looking at some of this data, you can look at some of these trends over time and say, you know what, if we want to get ahead of the curve, perhaps we need to implement action planning around line of sight to the customer, or look at how we're focusing on quality. Are we letting that slide as we worry about cost containment? Maybe we need to readdress our quality initiatives and include that more in the employee engagement and employee training. So again, the normative data in this case helps us look at opportunities to help the company be more competitive. That's important to the C-suite. So let's turn our attention to the benchmarking questions. These are questions that ask about our competitive advantage or competitive threat within a point in time. So we're comparing ourselves to industries or countries or even other segments and looking at how we compare relative to these other groups. So maybe your organization wants to be an industry leader in engagement. And you can compare yourself against other industries, but what if your industry is weak? What if you want to be a leader, but if your entire industry is lagging other industries, you are potentially still losing employees. You're recruiting from and losing to a variety of companies, not just those in your industry. So if your industry as a whole is having difficulty retaining employees or engaging employees, then you're still potentially losing out in terms of the employee engagement, employee retention. So, for example, in this graphic, we see the purple is the global norm, the yellow is financial services industry, orange is the manufacturing industry, and hospitals are the red bar. When we look at the recommend as a place to work, the very first set of bars to the left, we note that manufacturing is a little bit lower than the other industries. So if we're only comparing to manufacturing, if we're a manufacturer and we're only benchmarking ourselves against other manufacturers, we still may be lagging other industries. So it's important to place your data in a context that's big enough for you to understand where the competitive threat is coming from. You can also look at this data to see what aspects of engagement could be a potential Achilles heel in terms of retaining your employees. So, for example, if we look at jobs make use of my skills and abilities, we again see that manufacturing seems to be lagging other industries. So that may be a point where manufacturing needs to look at how they are using the skills and abilities of their employees. An Achilles heel for financial services may be being protected from safety and health hazards. That may be an issue that doesn't occur to that industry or leaders in that industry to focus on, but employees are saying that that could be a problem. And finally, when we look at management practices being ethical and honest, manufacturing and hospitals are quite low there. What's interesting is seeing the very high rating in the financial services industry, which suggests that maybe some of the changes that have occurred in the last several years are starting to be felt by employees in those companies. But again, if you're a hospital or a manufacturer and you've got employees that are concerned about ethics and integrity in the organization, they may be attracted to the financial services sector because they perceive there to be more ethical practices in those industries. Again, it provides a context for thinking about where might our retention efforts need to be focused. We can also look at different countries, and are they leaders or followers in engagement? This is going to be actually an example that we did in a client last year, but they were interested in looking at various countries that they had facilities in, and we do see a wide variation in engagement scores across markets. This is our normative panel data, or global panel data. And when you look at these differences, the questions that you might want to ask is this a country difference? Is it a cultural difference? Is it how we're implementing our engagement efforts in those countries? If we are over Japan, for example, if we're in Japan and we're much higher than Japan, why is that? Why are we much higher? If we're lower in Mexico, which has a very high normative score and recommending as a place to work, why might we be lagging? What's going on? It's not good enough to be a 65% in that market. We need to be bumping up our efforts. But this client in particular was looking to grow in several new markets. They were going to be placing facilities in a lot of new markets. And they were asking questions about recommendation to friends, planning on working there for the next 2 or 3 years, and the job giving them a sense of achievement. And they were concerned about employees in these new sites being raided or stolen by companies that are also investing in those markets. The markets they were interested in were also hot markets for other companies to be growing in. So why might they be at risk? Where are they at risk in these new markets? And in general, this company was incredibly strong. They had a very strong positive gap compared to the global norms. They compared their total company findings to the global norms, and they were way ahead. They had very strong performance across most of the key indicators of engagement. But then they looked at India and Kuwait and saw that they were substantially below the market norm in those countries. That raised some concerns because, again, those were markets they wanted to grow in. They wanted to invest. They wanted to be strong. And this analysis helped them identify markets where they were at risk and where they needed to ramp up engagement efforts. So, again, this is an example of the kinds of analysis that you can use normative data and assess where you are competitively in terms of your new markets. Another way we can use this data is to benchmark against segments or groups of people. And one of the things we often hear in clients or prospective clients is that the executive team feels everything's good, everything's fine, we're all happy, and there shouldn't be a problem with employee engagement. But sometimes the executive leadership is not always in tune with frontline employees, and what we see in our normative data is some pretty significant gaps between the full-time non-manager, which is that purple bar, and the senior executive managers, which is the red bar, across many, many indicators. We see as much as a 27 or 28-point gap in some of these key indicators of trust, confidence in leadership, feeling valued. I would recommend my employer as a place to work. So the leadership may not be in tune with the front line, and it's worth asking, is this typical? So this data helps you understand that, no, your company is not atypical in terms of the front line and executive leadership being a little bit different from each other in terms of perceiving what's going on. But then it asks the question of, could closing this gap be an important way to distinguish yourselves as an employer? If the global panel suggests that this gap is wide and exists across several countries, across industries, this may be an opportunity for differentiation. How can you get that connection between the top and the bottom of the organization tighter? How can there be more unity and consistency across the organization in terms of employee engagement? And so a company that offers that pushes toward that goal of creating even ratings across the organization may position itself to be a more competitive place for retaining and acquiring talent. Another thing we hear a lot about is that there's concern about retaining new hires. What we've noticed, and these purple circles show this, is that over time, employees might come in very very strong in engagement. Those employees with less than 1 year engagement, as we see toward the left-hand side of this graph, are quite high in engagement scores. They've got over 80% favorable in recommending the company as a place to work, being satisfied with the company, will be at the company next year. But you see this fairly significant drop at the 1 to 5 year tenure points, and we see that consistently in our global panel data, which is where, or normative data, which is where this is from. We see this sort of gap. So if you're a company that's concerned about new hires and are seeing that, is this something that we should be concerned about? Is this something we should be paying attention to? And the answer is yes. This is something that's happening across the globe, and it's a dynamic that if you can figure out how to run counter to that dynamic, how do you retain the momentum of engagement in mid-tenure or other employees? So, for example, here what we see is we see quite a drop in this purple line, I feel valued, and it stays low. So there's a tendency for people to stop feeling valued, to not have what they want, to do a good job, having a sense of accomplishment, being able to improve their skills. So by looking at the normative data, we can ask questions about what might be going on behind that trend. Why are we seeing that drop? Why are we not retaining employees after that 4th or 5th year? And how can we use this data to look at, well, maybe it's a value. Maybe we need to come up with action plans that create a sense of accomplishment and purpose for these employees. So again, it's one of those contextual things that, no, you're not alone, but if you do this and we figure out how to crack this nut and create a sense of engagement and energy and passion in that 1 to 5 year time period, we might be able to, first of all, retain employees rather than lose them, keep employees more passionate about what's going on in the company. They seem to drop in terms of being truly engaged from a heart perspective in the organization. And we might be able to capture experienced employees from other firms. Other firms are experiencing the same thing at that 6 to 20 year time frame. These are experienced people with a lot of knowledge, a lot of industry experience. We might be able to acquire employees from other companies if we figure out how to improve employee satisfaction and employee engagement in this very short period of time between 1 and 5 years. Here's another question that some of our clients ask us about, or topics that we talk about. Some of the focus that they have is we are really, really, really good in a certain area. And in this case, this client was very good in safety. They had very strong safety ratings. And the question was, is this something we should continue to emphasize? Is this something that's going to continue to help us acquire and retain employees? And this graph, again, a little bit busy, but what we've got here on the bottom, if you look along the bottom of the graph, it's how these items impact employee answers on recommending as a place to work. So it's to the left is very low impact, to the right is a very high impact on recommending the company as a place to work. If we look on the left-hand side of the scale, we have very low ratings of favorability up to very high favorability ratings. So what we create here are quadrants that show the importance and favorability of various items on their survey. For example, if you look at the top right quadrant, that's very favorable ratings and they're very high. This is something that's important to employees, and this company is doing, or the normative data says, in general, employers are doing very well at giving a sense of personal accomplishment. On the lower right-hand quadrant, you see employees in general say, this is very important, but they're not doing so well on this. Employers are not doing well on giving sufficient effort to get my opinions, helping me feel valued. I don't really have confidence in my management. Those are areas where employees around the globe are saying, these are things that are important to me, but I'm not getting what I really want. If you look up in the top left quadrant, you see this health and safety hazards item. Overall, in the global panel data, employers are saying, yeah, in general, relatively speaking, companies are doing pretty well at this, but this isn't as important to me as some of these other items. So the answer to this company's question about should we continue to focus on safety, what matters to today's employee, safety is important, but there are other things that may be more important if you're looking to acquire new employees. So when you're looking at ways to distinguish yourself, what should you emphasize to attract new employees, to retain your existing employees? You don't want to stop looking at safety and health hazards, but organizationally you may want to look at getting your employee opinions and helping employees feel valued, because those appear to be the areas that are important but not well served right now by many employers. So again, it helps what we call differentiation in the marketing world of how do you differentiate yourself against everyone else in the marketplace. If you can figure out how to help employees feel more valued, create more confidence in management, and get their opinions and make their opinions count in the organization, you have a higher chance of attracting new employees and retaining the ones you have. And sometimes what we do with these quadrants is we'll overlay your data or our client's data in the same quadrant so you can see where your data sits relative to the normative data, so you can see relatively high and low on the scale of favorability, non-favorability, or impact on place to work, where you're sitting. So it gives you a perspective on where you are and things that are important globally and in your own company. I mentioned before that we have this exit data, which is extremely exciting data to have, to ask employees about why they left their last job, what was it about their last employer that was engaging or not engaging, satisfying, dissatisfying. One of the things as we see as the economy improves, clients are asking, can we continue to be competitive if we don't increase pay? And what we wanted to show here is that globally, compensation is mentioned by about 20% of exit survey participants as an important reason or a main reason for leaving their last job. So that does suggest that, yes, indeed, compensation and salary are important reasons for leaving jobs. But you also see that career development and advancement opportunities are also important, equally important for staying or not staying with a job. So this suggests that rather than just focusing on salary or compensation, that career development and advancement opportunities are important. You might remember early on in one of the slides I showed that trend about top talent leaving and recognition and pay and getting recognition for a job well done. Those were things that continue to stay flat over time. It looks like career development and advancement is a big issue right now. People feel stuck. They're not moving along a path that they'd like to move along, and they're looking for companies that will give them the opportunity to develop and grow, not just pay them tons of money. But we do know that pay matters, but doesn't matter everywhere. And the other thing that this data can show us is globally, again, here's the same data we saw on the previous slide of compensation and salary and career development advancement opportunities being important. But what if you're losing a lot of employees and you have a presence in Japan? Should you just increase your compensation levels? Well, in Japan, we're seeing that compensation and salary are relatively important, but unlike other markets, the balance between work and personal life is also very important. Compared to other countries, you're seeing a difference in Japan about what matters. And this is the value of using panel or normative data, is that you can look across different countries and different places and say, a one-size-fits-all solution may not be the way to go. We need to look at our different markets, our different parts of the organization and say, there may be different strategies that we need to do in different parts of our company. And our normative data can help you identify, again, for the retention and the acquisition side of your business, how do we compete more successfully in these markets and not just assume that the same solution fits all environments. And then finally, a strategic question that is often asked is, why should we even bother with engagement research? Does measurement really even matter? And what I wanted to remind you is that the normative data is employees in companies that measure employee engagement. They are clients of TNS Employee Insights. They are employees in companies that are currently measuring employee satisfaction, employee engagement. The global data is just random sample of employees in various countries. So these employees may or may not be in companies that are measuring engagement. And what we see in this graphic is companies that are in the normative database are much stronger in a lot of the key metrics around employee engagement. They are much higher to say they will recommend the company as a place to work, much higher to recommend products and services to others, supervisor feedback, people cooperating to get the job done, being motivated to do more than what's expected, and perceiving that their job makes good use of their skills. What this says is that what you measure matters, and if it matters, you should measure it, because by measuring employee engagement, we see a significant uptick in these key metrics around employee engagement, and not just employee engagement, but recommendation, brand ambassadorship, advocacy of the company as a place to work, advocacy around products and services, very strong differences in companies that are measuring engagement. So if you need evidence to support the idea that the employee voice is important in the organization and can help the organization move forward, this is helpful data to have. Okay, to finish up here, we've got normative data being put in 3D. We talked about several ways that we can look at data, look at the normative data, and ask questions about how your data or your company fits into a larger context. We looked at time questions about, are we really improving, or are we just riding a wave? What trends should we be concerned about in engagement? What's coming down the road that we need to get ahead of? Benchmarking, we looked at other industries, other countries, as well as other market segments. Are the employees in our companies more engaged in our market areas? Do we have potential threat of loss of employees in certain markets? Are we lagging the industry in brand ambassadorship? Where are we at risk for talent rating? We want to be the top performer in certain countries. We want to grow in certain countries. Where are we at risk of losing our best talent? And then the normative data being mined to ask these deeper questions. Are younger employees really leaving companies more readily than older employees? Why? Is there something unique about the patterns in our company that we should be concerned about? Are we higher or lower on what matters to employees than other employees in the marketplace? Does engagement really matter here? Again, so what? What's the so what around normative data? Argue that it provides meaning to otherwise isolated numbers. It broadens the purpose. It helps us understand what's going on out there, because that's where employees are coming from and going to. It focuses the organization on trends and emerging opportunities. We don't want to be stuck looking at buggy whips and 8-track tapes. If you're not aware of what's going on out there, it's very hard to stay on top of what your employees need and want in the future. It expands the conversation to strategic questions that are linked to organizational growth. You're not just asking narrow questions anymore. You're focusing on bigger issues and strategic issues that helps broaden the conversation, broadens who's involved in the conversation around employee engagement. All these things increase the value and visibility to the C-suite and to the organization as a whole. Employee engagement data becomes a top priority. It becomes an issue that is linked to revenue, it's linked to profit, it's linked to customer service, it's linked to position in the marketplace, because the questions that you're asking about your data and your ability to look at data outside your organization provides the ability to answer some questions that are bigger and broader than just what's going on in here. So I want to thank you for staying with me for this period of time, and I think I'll turn it over here now to Jody to address any questions or comments that you have.
Thank you so much for a great presentation, Pat. I hope everyone learned as much as I did. At this time, we're going to take some questions that we gathered from the participants throughout the webinar. So first off that I got was, could you review the differences between the normative database and the global panel data?
Yeah, the global panel, again, is a random sample survey. It's using a panel sample in 21 countries, a sample of 800 just general employees across these countries. They're not clients of ours. We know what companies they work for, but they may or may not be companies that we work with. So it's a random sample of employees in various markets. The normative panel data is data that of our clients that we aggregate and collect and compare companies against. So it's really the companies that we provide services to. It's not a random sample. It's not as representative necessarily of all the countries, and we have some countries where we have more representation than others. We have some industries that are more representative than others, but it's a way for companies to compare against other companies that are measuring engagement. Hope that helps.
That was great. Thank you so much. The second question we received was, Pat, you talked mainly about strategic questions or applications. Is the data useful for things like action planning or supervisor coaching?
Oh, yeah, and I think we touched on that a few times, but I did talk a lot more about the strategic issues, but all these things help identify priorities, and certainly with action planning, with limited resources and people, time, money, and organizations, if you can identify, if you've got 5 things that came through in your survey that look like they're weaknesses or opportunities in your company, and you can bump up against a normative database and say, this is a weakness, but it's really not a weakness in our market. It's not a weakness, relatively speaking, in our industry. It's not a threat to us. Let's focus on these 3 things. The other thing that it can do in terms of coaching or working with the organization is it creates what's possible. We may be lagging in a certain area, and people, often there's resistance to change. There's resistance to making change. We're fine. We shouldn't have to change. We can't do anything else. It's not possible to be better. And the normative data helps you go back to people and say, yes, it is possible. This is what other organizations have done. It is possible to be better at this. This is how a pattern of data in these companies that are successful, this is how we can, these are things that they seem to be doing. These are high-level or higher ratings that they're getting that maybe we can, if we replicate those ratings or we can focus on these areas, that it can improve our standing as well. So it helps put, again, that action planning, it helps prioritize, it helps create what's possible at that action planning level.
Now, Pat, another participant asked, what if we don't have engagement surveys, or what if our questions are different than the ones, you or TNS uses?
Good question. I mean, it's often the case that the questions don't line up, and one of the things that we do is look at all the questions. We have a large battery of 126 questions in the normative database and dozens of questions in the global panel, and what we can do is try to line up those questions and see where the most similar questions are, and we just analyze how similar to similar are they. And sometimes we do more of a qualitative assessment. You get a cluster of questions that's about the immediate supervisor, or a cluster of questions around customer service, and you look at that cluster and qualitatively assess. The patterns here is that we are higher than the norm. We are doing better in this area in general at a qualitative level. I do a lot of qualitative research. I'm a believer in that we don't have to have rock solid, plus or minus 2% metrics on everything. So I think you look at patterns, you look at trends, and we try to line them up as much as possible so you can get some understanding of where you are relative to other organizations.
Excellent. And then lastly, just a lot of participants are interested in gaining more specific information about industries in countries or by job level by industry. Is that possible?
It's possible. It depends on the market. We can slice and dice the data in many ways, but it depends on the sample size. We don't want to lose statistical rigor for just giving you data. So what we would do is look at what countries, what industries, what questions, what subgroups that you would be interested in, and then look to make sure that we have an adequate sample to support solid data there. If there is not enough data for a solid number, we can roll it up. We often will roll up, for example, countries into a regional summary or an area, Middle East, Southeast Asia, those sorts of roll-ups. We can roll up industries. If you're in the aerospace industry, it's a little tough to perhaps find enough sample to support comparisons, but maybe we can combine it with other manufacturers or high tech, depending on what angle of aerospace you're interested in. So we can look at groupings of data if we don't have it at a sample level that's large enough to robustly support findings.
Well, thank you so much, Pat. That was excellent. Those questions were really great. We want to thank all of the participants today for adding those questions and, staying on for the entire presentation. Now I'm going to, at this time, hand it back over to our host, Scott, and he's just going to wrap it up.
Hi there, everybody. Thank you for staying on this webinar today. Pat, thank you again for that great presentation. As mentioned in the chat on the right-hand side of your screen, the slides from today and the webinar recording will be available. If you want to go ahead and click on that link and fill out the information, let us know what you would like to request, and we'll go ahead and send that out to you. The slides will be available for email today, and the recording takes about 24 to 48 hours to get out, but we will get that out to you as soon as possible. Again, the link is on the right-hand side in the chat bar. Up on your screen now, you'll see our upcoming webinars. The remainder of our webinars are for HRCI credit. So if you need that continuing education credit, all of these webinars have been approved for HRCI credit or pre-approved for HRCI credit. The next webinar is on June 21st. It's on exit surveys and exit survey panel data, which Pat touched on today. The title is After They Walk, Why Exit Management Matters. The website to register for these webinars is at www.tnswebinars.com. That's www.tnswebinars.com. Again, there's actually a second webinar on our topic today, Insights in 3D, using normative data to expand the value and visibility of your employee survey program. We will be rerunning this program with HRCI credit then. We will send an invite out to all those who attended today as well. We also hold roundtable discussions. This is a new program that we're trying out. It is where we have a group of 8 to 10 HR professionals where you can come and talk about strategies to increase engagement, any issues that you may be having, what works and what doesn't work. These roundtables are by invitation only. You can request an invitation by going to tnsroundtables.com. That's tnsroundtables.com. That's it for today. We appreciate everybody staying on. Again, you can check out our website at tnsemployeeinsights.com. You can find our webinars there as well as more information about our products and services. We'll answer any remaining chat questions that you may have in the chat bar. And so if you have any questions, please go ahead and ask them there. And we look forward to seeing you at our future webinars. Thanks, Pat. Thanks, Jody. And everybody have a nice day.